When the little boy hovered near his desk, refusing to let the back of his legs touch a chair, the watchful school janitor, Mr. Silas Blackwood, almost dismissed it as just another quirk of a restless kid. But then he noticed the slight tremor in those legs, and one chilling detail changed everything, hinting at secret bruises hidden beneath oversized clothes. Mr. Silas Blackwood had spent 16 years at Lincoln Elementary, a modest school set on the edge of a small Midwestern town that prided itself on well-kept lawns and smiling staff. He was the kind of janitor most people forgot the moment they walked by him in the corridor. Teachers would sometimes nod hello, occasionally calling him "sir" if they bothered to address him at all. Children scurried past, usually too preoccupied with giggling friends or urgent bathroom trips to notice the man pushing a mop and bucket. He liked that anonymity. It gave him freedom to observe without the pressure of constant small talk. He had once joked to himself that if the school building was the stage, he was the backstage crew, essential to making everything run smoothly, yet never taking a bow. Each morning, he started at daybreak, arriving before nearly anyone else, unlocking the doors, checking the boiler room, flicking on corridor lights so the halls would glow gently as teachers trickled in. Over the years, he'd grown skilled at anticipating the day's small mishaps: a broken faucet in the art room, a jammed locker near the cafeteria, a burnt-out bulb in the science lab. He prided himself on his thoroughness. He knew exactly where to find replacement light fixtures, which squeaky doors needed an extra dab of oil, which sections of floor would scuff the easiest when kids dragged their chairs. He also knew which teachers arrived early, rushing to prepare for that day's lesson, and which students roamed the halls first, perhaps because they found more comfort near an adult who didn't ask them to solve math problems or read aloud. He often kept mental notes on these kids, the ones who seemed a little lost or lonely. Though few people realized he paid such close attention, he never pried. He believed his job was to maintain the building, but silently, privately, he had a personal code. Be watchful, be present. And if he ever sensed a child truly needed help, he would do what he could. Over the years, he had quietly intervened in small ways, retrieving a lost jacket for a child who was too timid to approach the lost and found, leaving a few extra tissues near a kid who cried easily, or finding the right teacher to handle a scuffle he overheard in the corridor. Nothing major, just small gestures that might go unnoticed by anyone else. But it made Mr. Silas feel that his work encompassed more than just sweeping floors and locking classrooms at night. In those 16 years, he had come across his share of unusual behavior. Children were complicated little humans. Some were boisterous, some were painfully shy, some acted out when they were hungry or tired, and some carried heartbreak or burdens they could hardly name. But he had never encountered anyone quite like Leo Martinez. From the start, Leo caught his eye for one simple reason. The boy wouldn't sit. Ever. Not in the lunchroom, not on the circle rug during story time, not even at the small desk assigned to him. He hovered near the edges of the room, hugging the walls as though he wanted to fade right into them. At first glance, it looked like a quirky form of restlessness. But Mr. Silas, who had seen many fidgety kids over the years, sensed something else, a quiet tension that spoke of deeper trouble. Leo was small, maybe 8 or 9, with a shock of unruly dark hair that sometimes flopped into his eyes. He wore clothes that seemed either hand-me-downs or simply ill-fitting, pants slightly too short at the ankles, shirts that draped awkwardly. He usually had his arms crossed tight over his chest or folded behind him, as though protecting himself from unseen blows. On the rare occasions Mr. Silas glimpsed his face directly, he noticed the boy's eyes carried a haunted, watchful look, as though he expected a reprimand or a worse consequence at any moment. In Mr. Silas's earliest recollections, Leo kept to the corners of the cafeteria, leaning against a table rather than sitting. He stood behind classmates in line, avoiding direct eye contact. Whenever a teacher asked Leo to take a seat, the boy would whisper something about getting in trouble if he sat improperly. That statement perplexed Mr. Silas. Who would punish a child for sitting improperly? Teachers might encourage movement, sure, but it was equally common to see them telling an overactive kid to sit still. Leo's words suggested the opposite, as if there was some rule outside of school about not sitting comfortably. Mr. Silas's curiosity was piqued, but he knew from experience that pushing too hard could scare away a child who was already nervous. So he watched. At recess, Leo often hovered near the fence, arms wrapped around himself, glancing nervously whenever an adult approached. In the classroom, during circle time or story hour, he would stand to the side, shifting his weight from foot to foot. The teacher, Miss Evans, seemed to have grown weary of coaxing him. Mr. Silas once overheard her mutter to the aide that Leo had been flagged for possible oppositional defiance. "He's so anxious, and it comes off as defiance," she told the aide. "He refuses to do normal tasks. We just have to document everything." Mr. Silas tucked that phrase away in his mind. Document everything. He wondered how many notes had been scribbled into Leo's file and how many professionals had brushed off his tension as mere misbehavior. One Monday morning, only a few weeks into the new semester, Mr. Silas found himself in the hallway outside Ms. Evans's classroom. The weekend hustle had left the corridor messy with spilled applesauce and bits of chalk dust from the older kids. He had set up his yellow "Caution Wet Floor" sign and started mopping the sticky patches. The children trickled in one by one, dropping off coats and backpacks at their cubbies before filing into the classroom. That was when he noticed Leo. He was standing utterly still near his cubby, backpack dangling from one shoulder. His legs seemed to tremble, as though supporting a much larger weight than his small frame. The other kids paid him no mind, busily chatting or rummaging for their pencils and notebooks. But Mr. Silas saw the slight tremor and felt a sudden jolt of worry. Cautiously, he pushed the mop bucket aside and stepped over to the boy. He made sure his tone was gentle, pitched low. "Hey, kid," he said softly, trying to project warmth without intruding. "You okay there?" Leo's gaze flicked up, but only for a second. The boy let out a shaky breath. He mumbled something so quiet that Mr. Silas had to lean in. "If I sit wrong," Leo whispered, I have to kneel." Mr. Silas froze, a cold prickle running down his spine. That was no ordinary child's statement. Kneel? He opened his mouth to ask more, but before he could, Leo jerked away, hooking his fingers around the cubby shelf. Then he disappeared into the classroom as Miss Evans called for everyone to gather. Mr. Silas stood there, mop handle in his grip, feeling a wave of alarm. Something about the boy's tone and the mention of having to kneel told him this was not a joke. That night, in the worn spiral notebook he kept for personal observations, his clipboard log as he called it, Mr. Silas jotted a line about Leo's behavior. He noted the trembling legs, the mention of the kneeling punishment, the sense of fear. Over the years, he had learned not to rely on memory alone. He was not a mandated reporter, unlike teachers and counselors, but he believed in documenting anything that might eventually help a child. The next day, he quietly asked the school nurse, Mrs. Henderson, if she had any records on Leo. She shook her head in a resigned way, saying there had been a concern filed weeks ago about possible neglect, but it was quickly dismissed as behavioral manipulation, according to the foster guardian's statement. The nurse grimaced. "This system is so broken," she muttered. "We flagged it, but it went nowhere." That name came up in the nurse's brief note. The foster guardian was a man named Dale Harding, a seemingly respectable local contractor with no criminal record. The nurse said it looked like he'd taken Leo in after a short stint at a different home. Immediately, Mr. Silas's suspicion deepened. He'd encountered a few foster families over the years, good ones and some that seemed less nurturing. The idea that a child might be stuck with a caretaker who inflicted or allowed physical punishment made him feel sick. But he had no direct evidence, just a snippet from Leo about kneeling and the nurse's note about a dismissed concern. Mr. Silas decided to keep an even closer watch. 2 days later, Mr. Silas was cleaning the boys' bathroom during the mid-morning lull. That was usually a quiet time. Classes were in session, and few children asked for hall passes so early unless they were ill. He went about his routine, scrubbing sinks, emptying the trash bin, humming softly to himself. Then he heard a dull thud from one of the stalls. He paused, listening. A muffled sound followed, like a strangled gasp or a whimper. Alarmed, he stepped toward the far stall, noticing a pair of small sneakers visible beneath the door. They were motionless. He knocked gently. "Hey, everything okay in there?" No response. He pushed on the stall door, which wasn't locked, and found Leo kneeling on the cold tile floor, arms wrapped around his stomach. The boy's head was bowed. Mr. Silas's eyes widened as he saw Leo's knees, visible beneath his slightly too short pants, were scraped and bruised, as if from prolonged kneeling on a hard surface. Horror and anger churned in Mr. Silas's stomach. He immediately crouched, trying to speak calmly. "What happened, bud? Are you hurt?" Leo just shivered, his breath hitching. After a tense moment, he spoke in a tremulous whisper. He said, "If I make noise or don't sit still, I have to kneel on the rocks." Confusion swirled in Mr. Silas's mind. "Rocks? What do you mean, Leo?" The boy nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. "There's a tray of decorative rocks at home. If I don't sit perfectly still, he makes me kneel on them. It hurts." He swallowed, stifling a sob. "He punished me 'cause I dropped my pencil." A cold wave of rage swirled inside Mr. Silas, but he forced himself to stay calm for the boy's sake. He gently helped Leo to his feet, careful not to touch the sore spots. The boy winced but allowed Mr. Silas to guide him to the sink. "We'll get you cleaned up," Mr. Silas said in a soothing tone. "I need to let someone know about this, okay? We can't just ignore this." Leo's eyes flared with panic. "No! He'll find out," he stammered, voice trembling. Mr. Silas placed a reassuring hand near the boy's shoulder, not quite touching him. "It's not right for him to hurt you like this. We'll make sure you're safe." The fear in Leo's eyes was heartbreaking. That afternoon, Mr. Silas drafted a detailed incident report, describing Leo's injuries to his knees, the reference to being forced to kneel on rocks for not sitting still or making noise. He attached a photo he took discreetly of Leo's bruised knees. He hated photographing a child in distress, but he felt it might be the only tangible evidence he could provide. Then he brought these to the school administration. He was not a teacher, but he hoped they'd see the gravity of the situation. The vice principal, Mr. Davies, read the statement with a concerned frown. He promised he'd forward it to the district child welfare liaison. Mr. Silas left his office feeling anxious but slightly hopeful. At least now there was documentation. 2 days passed and no immediate action was visible. On the third day, Mr. Davies pulled him aside to deliver the official response. No visible injuries observed during home visit. Child denies fear. Guardian is cooperative. No further action recommended. The words made Mr. Silas's blood boil. He demanded to know how it could be no visible injuries given the bruised knees. Mr. Davies shrugged helplessly. They claim he's clumsy, fell playing outside. The child was too scared to say anything. There's no direct proof of abuse, and the guardian seems very respectable. No history of violence. The subtext was painfully clear. The system was taking the guardian's word over a frightened child's or a janitor's. That night, Mr. Silas sat in his cramped apartment, flipping through his notes, reading again the lines about kneeling on rocks, about fear. He recalled how the nurse's earlier concern had been dismissed in a similar manner. It felt like something or someone was bearing the reports before they gained traction. He was furious but also uncertain how to proceed. He wasn't a mandated reporter, and the official channels had failed. Still, he couldn't let it go. He thought of Leo trembling in that bathroom stall, of the quiet terror in his voice. Mr. Silas decided that if the system wouldn't look deeper, maybe he needed to gather more evidence on his own. Evidence that no one could ignore. He devised a plan. The school had a front drop-off zone where parents or guardians picked up and dropped off kids each day. There was a small supply closet near the building's entrance, typically used for storing extra cleaning solutions and a rolling trash bin. From that supply closet's narrow window, one could see the curb where cars lined up. Mr. Silas thought if he placed a discreet motion-activated camera in that window, he might catch glimpses of how Leo was treated at drop-off. It was a risky move, probably not strictly allowed, but he rationalized that if a child was being harmed, that took precedence over concerns about privacy. The next morning, he installed a small camera, the kind he'd once used for home security in his old garage. He angled it so it captured the corner of the curb near the sign labeled "Pickup/drop-off only." He didn't mention this to anyone, not even the nurse. Days went by without any revealing footage. Leo still arrived wearing the same anxious expression, the same rigid posture. He rarely spoke to the man who dropped him off, a tall figure with broad shoulders, presumably Dale Harding. Mr. Silas combed through the camera's recordings each evening, but mostly he saw Leo stepping out of the car, then quickly walking up the sidewalk. No clear physical altercation was visible. He worried that maybe the real abuse happened behind closed doors in the home. Then almost a week after he set up the camera, he found what he needed. It was early one morning, the sky still streaked with dawn when Harding's car pulled up. The camera's timestamp read 7:11 a.m. Leo got out slowly, as though each movement hurt. Then the tall man lunged forward, yanking the backpack off Leo's shoulders. The force jerked the boy's head back. Mr. Silas watched in horror as Harding roughly grabbed Leo's arm when the boy stumbled slightly, shoving him hard against the car door. The man's face was partially turned away from the lens, but the aggression was unmistakable. Leo and Harding exchanged words, though the camera had no audio. The child's face was a mask of fear. The confrontation lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to confirm that physical abuse was happening. Mr. Silas's heart pounded as he rewatched the clip. This was definitive proof that the child's injuries weren't imaginary or solely from clumsiness. He transferred the file to a USB drive, making sure to keep a backup. He considered turning it over to the school again, but he feared another cover-up or a bureaucratic runaround. He remembered the nurse's offhand comment about the system being broken. He needed someone who would act immediately. That was when he thought of his niece, Sarah. She wasn't law enforcement, but she worked for a dedicated child advocacy nonprofit in a neighboring county. She understood child protection laws better than anyone he knew. That same evening, he drove an hour to see her, not wanting to risk sending the footage electronically. He explained everything: Leo's bruises, the suspicious dismissal of previous reports, the kneeling punishments. Sarah listened, her jaw tight, furious tears in her eyes. She took the USB, promising to share it with a trusted contact in Child Protective Services, CPS. "We'll make sure it doesn't get brushed aside," she said firmly. Mr. Silas felt a surge of relief. At least now an independent advocate would push for an investigation. He left her place feeling more hopeful than he had in weeks. What neither of them fully realized was how deep the protective shield around Harding ran. Sarah's contact discovered that Harding was well connected locally, active in community groups and known to some county officials. This perhaps explained why prior concerns about Harding's foster placements might have been downplayed or dismissed quickly. 3 other children had gone through Harding's home in the past 5 years. Each one ended up labeled defiant or manipulative, then removed to another foster arrangement for noncompliance. None of those cases had triggered official scrutiny because the injuries or negative behavior reports were pinned on the children themselves. Mr. Silas felt physically ill when he learned that this had happened multiple times. It was an organized pattern of turning a blind eye, ensuring that no one looked too closely at Harding's methods. But the footage Mr. Silas had captured was undeniable. Even if someone tried to bury the complaint, the video existed as stark visual proof. Under pressure from Sarah's associates and an internal audit, the county finally took action. Within 72 hours, a new caseworker was assigned, and a police officer accompanied them to Harding's home for a thorough inspection. This time, no superficial excuses or rush denials were accepted. Leo was removed from the house that day, his face a blend of relief and terror as he stepped into the caseworker's car. Mr. Silas wished he could have been there to offer reassurance, but he had no direct role in that process. He could only wait for news. The next morning, news of the removal rippled through Lincoln Elementary. Whispers among teachers reached Mr. Silas. Leo was out of that home, but an even more distressing complication arose. The foster system was overcrowded. No open beds were available in the immediate area, and the label on Leo's file, defiant, manipulative, high behavioral concerns, made prospective fosters wary. Many children in the system faced these difficulties, especially older kids with any mention of aggression or anxiety. Mr. Silas felt a surge of frustration. The system had allowed him to suffer, and now, even in rescue, it left him in limbo. Mr. Silas wrestled with an idea that felt both outrageous and inevitable. Applying to be Leo's foster caretaker himself, he was single, with a modest income, living in a small one-bedroom apartment. He had never entertained the idea of fostering a child, but the boy had latched on to him in a sense, trusting him in that bathroom stall, and Mr. Silas felt responsible, as though fate had placed him in Leo's path for exactly this reason. After hours of soul-searching, he approached a caseworker and tentatively offered to open his home to Leo, if it meant the boy wouldn't bounce into another damaging environment. She was initially surprised. He explained he had no prior fostering experience, but he had a stable job, references, and no criminal record. He had been quietly saving money for years. The caseworker didn't dismiss him outright. Perhaps she sensed his sincerity. She told him the process required emergency approval, background checks, and a home visit. But given the shortage of fosters, it was possible. Over the next several days, Mr. Silas navigated a whirlwind of paperwork, interviews, and nervous waiting. He called in favors from a teacher friend who had always admired his calm presence. He asked the school nurse to vouch for him. He tidied his small apartment from top to bottom, buying a second-hand bed frame to convert his living room area into a makeshift bedroom. He felt daunted by the emotional weight of caring for a traumatized child, but every time doubts crept in, he recalled Leo's trembling voice in the bathroom, confessing about kneeling on rocks that left marks. That memory steeled his resolve. Finally, late one afternoon, the caseworker informed him that the emergency approval had gone through, contingent on a more thorough check down the line. They would bring Leo to him that evening. Mr. Silas's heart thundered in his chest. He felt relief, excitement, and fear all at once. He had prepared a small dinner, rummaged for some plates and cups that might appeal to a child, and put out fresh sheets. But even as he bustled around, doubt nibbled at his mind. Could he really handle the emotional needs of a boy so obviously scarred? Would Leo trust him? Would it be enough to keep the child safe? He didn't have time to dwell on these questions too long. A plain sedan pulled up outside his apartment building just after dusk. The caseworker emerged, followed by Leo. Even under the glow of the street lamp, Mr. Silas could see how pale the boy looked, how his posture was stiff with apprehension. Mr. Silas stepped onto the front stoop, trying to project calm. Leo clutched a worn backpack. He didn't speak until they reached Mr. Silas's door. Then as the caseworker lingered by the car, giving them space, Leo turned to Mr. Silas and said in a tiny, trembling voice, Are you sure I can stay? I don't want to get in trouble if I sit wrong." Mr. Silas felt tears prick his eyes. "You're not going to be in trouble," he said gently, guiding Leo inside. "Not here." He wished he could promise the boy a perfect life, but he knew the road ahead might be bumpy, dealing with the legalities of the case and the child's trauma. Still, the immediate sense of safety was a start. The next morning he took Leo to school, not as a lone janitor crossing paths with a trembling student, but as his foster caretaker. The staff took note, some raising eyebrows in surprise, others offering quiet encouragement. There was no major announcement or fanfare, just hushed recognition that Mr. Silas had stepped forward in a time of crisis. For Leo's part, he seemed unsure how to act, glancing at Mr. Silas with confusion, perhaps waiting for a scolding that never came. On the practical side, a wave of complications arose. Mr. Silas had to adjust his work schedule to ensure Leo had supervision. The principal allowed some flexibility, letting him come in earlier to finish major cleaning tasks so he could oversee Leo after school ended. Teachers, noticing the shift, seemed to grow more sympathetic to Leo. Some even apologized for labeling him defiant. But the school bureaucracy moved slowly. The real victory was that Leo no longer arrived with that dreaded tension in his shoulders. Bit by bit, Mr. Silas watched the boy's posture relax. The first time he saw Leo calmly lower himself onto a cafeteria bench, albeit gingerly, he felt an odd surge of joy. The boy looked around as if expecting a blow, but none came. Mr. Silas realized how foreign the concept of simply sitting must have been for Leo under Harding's rule. Yet the shadows of abuse didn't vanish overnight. Leo sometimes jerked awake from nightmares or froze if Mr. Silas accidentally moved too quickly around him. There were still formalities to manage. The child protective case was ongoing, with Harding facing potential charges for assault, especially after the video footage and previous complaints were reevaluated. The fiasco about Harding's influence also loomed. Rumors suggested that further investigations might topple a chain of neglect within the local system. Mr. Silas tried not to dwell on that, focusing instead on creating a stable environment for Leo. He cooked simple meals, showed him how to do small chores without fear of punishment, and let him watch cartoons in the evening if his homework was done. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, an entirely new experience for a boy who had lived in dread of sitting still. Staff at school, who once wrote off Leo as uncooperative, began to notice small changes. He would glance up occasionally when someone addressed him, and he occasionally spoke in short sentences rather than whispered replies. His teacher, Ms. Evans, told Mr. Silas that Leo seemed more willing to engage in class discussions, though he still tensed if asked to remain seated for too long. The nurse reported that some of his bruises had healed and new ones weren't appearing. Mr. Silas found a quiet satisfaction in these signs of progress, though he never let down his guard. He remembered how easily the system had overlooked the boy before. He was determined not to let that happen again. One day, after the final bell rang, Mr. Silas was gathering his janitorial cart to wipe down a messy art room when he found Leo waiting for him in the corridor. The boy clutched a piece of paper colored with crayons. He hesitated, then extended it. Mr. Silas took it gingerly, unsure what to expect. It was a drawing of a soft cushion, painted in blues and greens. Beneath it, Leo had scribbled, "Safe cushion. No hurting." Mr. Silas blinked, feeling a lump in his throat. He nodded slowly. "Thank you for sharing this, buddy. You want to explain it to me?" Leo shrugged, eyes downcast. "If you have a cushion," he murmured, "it shouldn't be for hurting. It should just be for sitting." Mr. Silas placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "I agree. I won't let anything happen to you like that again." The boy nodded, a tiny spark of trust in his gaze. That trust was tested a few days later when news circulated that Harding intended to appeal the removal of Leo from his custody. He claimed the child was mentally unstable and had fabricated stories. Mr. Silas braced himself for a potential legal battle, worried that the veneer of credibility Harding had with certain officials might overshadow the new revelations. The fear that Leo might be forced back into that environment made Mr. Silas's stomach churn. Sarah assured him that the evidence was overwhelming, especially the footage of the shove. She also believed the uncovered scandal regarding Harding's influence would discredit his claims. Still, the wheels of bureaucracy could spin in unpredictable ways. In the meantime, Mr. Silas maintained his quiet watchfulness, balancing his double role as janitor and foster figure. He didn't see himself as a father, more like a caretaker who happened to be the only adult standing between Leo and further harm. Yet a paternal protectiveness began to blossom within him. He found himself perusing secondhand stores for child-sized hoodies that fit better, making sure Leo had a decent lunch packed each morning. He started each day by guiding Leo in from the car, his car now, rather than letting him shuffle alone in the drop-off zone. The staff, seeing them arrive together, seemed almost touched by the transformation. Some whispered that Mr. Silas was going above and beyond, a testament to his unassuming nature that no one had guessed. And Leo slowly opened up. One evening, while they sat at the small two-person table in Mr. Silas's apartment, finishing a dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches, Leo spoke about the kneeling punishment in detail. He explained how Harding used it, forcing him to kneel for hours, threatening that if he moved or made noise, the punishment would be worse next time. Mr. Silas felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. He asked softly, "Did he do that to you often?" Leo nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks. "He said it was for my own good," the boy whispered. Mr. Silas clenched his fists under the table, hating that any child had to endure such cruelty. In the days that followed, a swirl of developments at the district office indicated that more was unraveling behind the scenes. Officials potentially involved in dismissing earlier concerns were placed under internal investigation. Several older files of fosters who had passed through Harding's home were reopened. The entire fiasco threatened to become a small scandal, albeit overshadowed by bigger stories in the region. None of that truly mattered to Mr. Silas as much as ensuring Leo wouldn't slip through the cracks again. He was prepared to do anything to keep the boy safe, even if that meant standing up in a hearing to explain the child's injuries. Though the thought of public speaking made him uneasy, he steeled himself for it. Meanwhile, daily life at Lincoln Elementary continued. Mr. Silas handled clogged drains, replaced flickering light tubes, wiped scuffs off the gym floor. Teachers carried on with their lessons. The kids, including Leo, faced the usual swirl of school projects and minor dramas. Lost lunches, spelling tests, group presentations. The difference was that Leo now had a small anchor in Mr. Silas. Once Miss Evans confided that Leo had voluntarily joined a small reading group, actually sitting at the table. He shifted a lot, she admitted, but he sat. That's huge. Mr. Silas felt a surge of pride in the boy. It was a victory, however small. As the weeks passed, the tension around the court case built. Through Sarah's updates, Mr. Silas learned that Harding was doubling down on his defense, insisting the video was taken out of context, that the shove was a playful nudge, that Leo was a habitual liar. But the newly assigned caseworker and the juvenile advocate were determined to show the pattern of abuse. They had older statements from other fosters, once buried but now retrieved. Mr. Silas could only hope that the judge would see through Harding's facade. He worried for Leo's emotional state. The boy sometimes asked if that man would come back to take him away. Mr. Silas reassured him as best he could, but the question gnawed at them both. The climactic moment came on, a Wednesday after Mr. Silas had cleaned up a major water spill in the lunchroom. He stepped into the main office to find Mr. Davies, the vice principal, beckoning him over. He wore a relieved expression. "They've closed the case," he said in a hushed tone. "Harding lost his appeal. The charges are official. Leo's not going anywhere." Mr. Silas closed his eyes briefly, exhaling a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The sense of relief was overwhelming. He pictured Leo's anxious face and the specter of the kneeling punishment. Now the boy could heal without that looming threat. Mr. Davies clasped Mr. Silas's shoulder. "I just wanted to say thank you," he murmured. "You went above and beyond." The rest of the day felt surreal. Mr. Silas saw Leo in the hallway after class, rummaging in his cubby. He walked up, heart thumping with quiet joy. The boy looked up wearily, then noticed Mr. Silas's gentle smile. They said, "I can stay," Leo whispered, tears brimming in his eyes. Mr. Silas nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He rested a hand lightly on the boy's back, mindful not to startle him. "That's right," he said. "We're heading home in a bit. And hey, if you feel like sitting on the cushions tonight, you can do that as long as you want." A shaky, hesitant smile crossed Leo's face. He didn't speak, but the relief in his eyes was enough. And that evening, as Mr. Silas locked up the school and guided Leo out the front doors, he felt the weight of months of worry lift. He realized the child who once refused to sit was finally free to rest without fear. The hallway lights dimmed behind them, and the glass doors reflected Leo's small frame next to the quiet janitor who had noticed what no one else had. They walked together into the dusky parking lot, side by side, a strange but steadfast duo. Leo paused at the car, turning to look at Mr. Silas. The boy asked softly, "Can we watch a movie tonight?" He hesitated. I'll sit on the cushions." Mr. Silas's voice caught. "Yeah, bud," he said thickly. "We absolutely can.